name is DeShawne Coleman, and the first time I heard the name Jesus, I was 9 years old. I was walking home from school with a friend of mine, and she was telling me that I needed to put lamb's blood on my door if I didn't want my head chopped off by Jesus. So needless to say, I, at that point in time, thought she was crazy, and whoever Jesus was crazy also. 9 years old was also the time that the first time that my mother left me. I came home from school one day and everyone was gone. It was about 9 o'clock p.m. and I realized that something wasn't right. And so I picked up the phone and I called my aunt, and she came and got me. From that day on, I started living with her. About a year and a half later, my mother showed up and she came, and I am about 10 or 11. And as an 11-year-old girl, you don't ask questions. You're just excited to see your mother. And she lived with us for about 6 months. And then I came home from school again, and she was gone again. This time, she stayed gone for a few years. So I had gotten accustomed to living with my aunt. At the age of 12, I was invited to church by a neighbor. And my aunt made me go. It was Easter. And I learned at that point in time that Jesus did not want me to put lamb's blood on my door, or I was going to get my head chopped off. And my neighbor did not know what she was talking about when I was 9. So I started attending church there, but I didn't really understand it. It was just a way for me to get out of the house on the weekends. I was able to sleep over on Saturday nights, so that's why I went. When I was 12 years old, my mother came back again, and this time she came back to get me. And I remember that day, it was a school day, and I had decided to stay home from school. And my aunt agreed. She never let me stay home from school, but for some reason this day she did. And we were laying in her bed watching TV, and we hear a knock on the door. And so she looks out the window, and she sees that it's my mother. And she says, let's be really quiet, because if we're really quiet, then maybe she'll leave. But she didn't leave. She came and looked through the bedroom window and saw us laying there and said, I see you guys in there, so come open the door. And so my aunt got up, and I remember as she got up to go to the door, I told her, please don't make me go with her. I was tired, and I didn't trust her. So my aunt went to the door, and they talked for a little bit, and the next thing I knew, she was asking me to come to speak to my mother. And I went and spoke to my mother, and you cannot pit a 12-year-old girl up against her mother. My mother was crying and telling me that if I really loved her, that I would come with her. She came back for me that day, and I felt like I had no choice but to go. And so I left, and I moved with my mother. The next 4 years were hell, to say the least. My mother, which I later learned, left me so that she could be in a relationship with the man who she was now living with. When I began living with my mother, I suffered physical and sexual abuse at the hands of her boyfriend. I started running away. I started drinking very heavily, getting into drugs. Found myself staying from place to place just to kind of get by. My mother was there one moment and not there the next. She couldn't keep a stable home for us, and so oftentimes I found us living in no-room trailers, and that wasn't feasible for me because I couldn't be in a home where I didn't have a locked door. And so I started staying out a lot. It was a very difficult time for me, and I remember one day I was living with a friend and her family, and her family told me that it was time for me to go. They couldn't deal with me anymore, and I understood. I was a handful. I was on my own, and so I acted that way. And so I called my sister, and my sister that day came to get me. And I remember when she picked me up, she said, just so you know, I'm saved, and so you ain't got to get saved, but you got to go to church. And I was like, oh, that's okay, because the family I was staying with, they were pastors, and so I can go to church. That's nothing. And so the next day, she had choir rehearsal. So they came and they picked me up and we moved, and I ended up moving in with them. The next day she had choir rehearsal, and so she dressed me up really, really nicely. My clothes were all too short and too tight, and so she dressed me really nicely and made sure that I looked very holy. I had on a nice cream turtleneck and some nice jeans, and my hair was pulled back into a ponytail. And I went and I met all of her church friends. And in that moment, I realized that I needed to become like them. And so I took everything that I had literally just walked away from the day before and buried it deep, hoping that no one would ever find out who I really was or what I really was. And I tried. I tried with everything in me to be the good Christian that they talked about, to be the one that lives right, to live holy. But I couldn't get it. I didn't understand it. They said, God loves you, but I wasn't lovable. In my mind, I didn't believe that I deserved love. If my parents couldn't love me, then how could anyone else? And so I still acted, or I still carried behaviors that were very reminiscent to who I was before I had met Christ. Upon coming into this church, the first Sunday that I was there, my grandfather came with us, and he had an enlarged heart. And that Sunday, he was healed. His heart was healed. And so that was the day that I realized that Jesus Christ was real. And I wanted him. I wanted him badly, but I didn't know how to get him. And so life went on. When I was 19 years old, I ended up pregnant by the pastor's son, the pastor of the church that I was attending, by his son. And a few months after I got pregnant, he ended up marrying another woman in the church. And so we're all attending the same church. And a lot of people would look at me like there was something wrong with me for staying. But that was where Jesus was real to me. And so if I left there, then I felt like I would be leaving him. And so I stayed, and I just suffered through the humility until I was asked to leave. And once I was asked to leave, I remember I told God, okay, well, at this point in time, you're going to have to prove to me now that you're real, and walked away from Christianity and became one of those very spiritual people. I knew there was something greater than me out there, but I would not give it any credit. It was the universe, and I was going to create my own destiny and become who I wanted to be on my own terms. And that didn't work out so well for me, because I ended up in another relationship and was in that relationship for 7 years and had 2 additional children. By the time that relationship was ready to end, I was empty. I was lost. I didn't know who I was or what I wanted or anything. And I was miserable, and I needed something different. And so one day I ended that relationship, and a few months later I decided to pick up and move to Atlanta, Georgia. I had no family there. I knew one person there. I didn't have a job. I had secured an apartment, but I didn't know how I was going to pay for it. But I packed my minivan, packed my children into my minivan, and we drove across the country to Atlanta, Georgia. I didn't know then, but now I'm more than confident that that was nothing but God directing my path. Because when I got there, the first thing that I realized is I can't do this on my own, and I needed God. Not the universe, not some spiritual being that's out there, but I needed God. I needed the real, the existent, the all-powerful God. And I began to get to know him in ways that I had never known him before. I studied him. I talked to him. I listened to him. And I built a real relationship with him while I was there. Things transpired while being there. I ended up getting into another relationship, and that relationship really took me downhill as far as emotionally, and it was very abusive, verbally and emotionally, and pulled me away from God. So much so to the point where I just couldn't do it anymore. I felt like it was really time for me to go. I didn't want to fight anymore. I was tired. And I remember laying in the bed one night crying telling God that I was tired, and I heard him say my name. And I got up, and the kids were in the bed with me, and so I walked into my closet, and I sat there in my closet on the floor and opened my Bible and began reading. And the Lord began to speak to me and to tell me that I am forgiven, that he wants to heal me and to make me whole. But I needed to make a choice. I needed to choose him, or I needed to choose me. And that night I chose him. And I made the commitment to Christ that night that no matter what, that I would follow him and that I would fight through everything to be with him. And a few months later, a few months after that, and I just went after him with everything that I had in me. I began serving in my local church. I began small groups in my local church in Atlanta. I got plugged in so deeply because I knew that I needed to hold on and to get everything that God was throwing my way, or whatever he was giving me. I needed it. I needed it all because I needed him. I could not survive another day without him. And so I went after it all. And a few months after that, I remember driving home from work, and the thought came to mind that I love my mother, which I hadn't said for 17 years. But I was driving home, and all I could think about was how much I love her. And I began praying over her, the first time I had ever done that in my life. And in that moment, God spoke and said that it's time to go home. And so without hesitation, I packed up, of course, planned a little bit better than the first move, but I did. I packed up, and within a few months, I was here back in LA. So I came back to LA, and I was so full of faith. I believed that I was on a mission from God, and nothing could get in my way. And so I landed here in Los Angeles and realized that I had just walked away from everything that I had known, and life was really, really good in Atlanta, and what did I just do? And I fell apart. And I knew that I needed to get plugged into a church, and so I started attending the church that had asked me to leave years prior. That is the church that my oldest daughter, that her father attended, and my daughter was attending. And so it was an opportunity for me to be in worship service with my daughter on Sundays, and that was always really important to me. And so I started attending that church, and I knew, wow, it was amazing, because God was able to show me that who I used to be is not who I am. And the respect and the honor that I received from those who had asked me to leave was incredible for me. It was humbling for me. I knew that that's not where I needed to be. I wasn't growing. I came from an environment where you serve. You understand that your life is not about you, but it's about what you do for others. That's the only thing that matters. And so I knew that I needed to be in a place that pushed me to become who God has truly designed me to be. And so after being there for a year and feeling like I was drowning, I set out on a search for another church. And I was online, and I came across Oasis. And I remember the first Sunday that I went, they were talking about if these walls could talk, and people were giving their testimonies. And every single person that stood up there was reminiscent of me, of where I'd come from and where I hope to go. And so I continued to go, and after, I would say, about 3 weeks, I signed up to serve. And once the Connect Group season started, I signed up for a Connect Group, and I jumped right in head first. And since then, God has transformed my world completely. I don't have any financial concerns, because God is my provider, and he takes care of everything. And not only that, my family is whole, and we are happy, and we are healing, and I get to speak to my mom, and I'm not angry anymore. And I have a family. I don't feel like I'm drowning anymore. People who believe in me, who inspire me, who push me to do great things. this next season, I will be leading a Connect group and working alongside some amazing women to help empower and build up other single moms. And it's just an amazing journey that I'm on, and I am so looking forward to seeing where God takes me. And I thank Him with my whole heart for every experience that I've had, because it's because of those that I'm able to serve others with a genuine heart, that I can love people because I know what it feels like to feel unloved. And so I thank God for every experience and every opportunity. And it's because of Him that I'm standing here today, or sitting here today. It's because of Him that I'm here.